All right, welcome everyone to our virtual event, An Afternoon with Cornel West, Race, Religion, and Politics in a Year of Global Calamity. We are thrilled today to spend a part of the afternoon with Dr. West and with all of you here in Colorado Springs and across the globe. My name is Jeff Scholes, and I'm an Associate Professor of Religious Studies in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, as well as the Director of the Center for Religious Diversity and Public Life here at UCCS. I am joined today by two of my local colleagues who will interview Dr. West with me. Permit me to have each of them introduce themselves. Christopher, you want to start?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Christopher Hunt, and I'm an Assistant Professor of Religion at Colorado College.
And Stephany?
I am Reverend Dr. Stephany Rose Spaulding, the Chair of Women's and Ethnic Studies at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and founder of the Truth and Conciliation Commission. And we are so thankful to be here and be present with all of you right now.
Thank you both. Yes, we are. Before I introduce Dr. West, I want to give a couple thanks out. First of all, to Jared Werner and Margie Oldham at UCCS, who have helped put this event together, and Ryan Bonagali at Colorado College as well for helping promote the event and help put it together. It's been quite a collective event. This event is a collaboration between the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs and Colorado College. In bringing together scholars, sponsors, and resources, we hope this event further cements the relationship as both schools continue to serve our campuses and the local Colorado Springs community. The list of sponsors for this event conveys this important partnership. We're thankful for the generous support from the Center for Religious Diversity and Public Life at UCCS, the Cultural Attractions Fund at CC or Colorado College, the Women's and Ethics Studies program at UCCS, the Political Science Department at CC, the McHugh Endowed Fund, the Philosophy Department at UCCS, the Philosophy Department at CC, the Religion Department at CC, and finally the Heller Center at UCCS. Okay, again, we're very excited to welcome Dr. Cornel West. Dr. West is a professor of the practice of public philosophy at Harvard University and professor emeritus at Princeton University. He's written 20 books and has edited 13. Dr. West is best known for his classics, Race Matters, Democracy Matters, and my personal favorite, The American Invasion of Philosophy, and for his memoir, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. His most recent book, Black Prophetic Fire, offers an unflinching look at 19th and 20th century African-American activists and their legacies. Dr. West is the co-host with Dr. Tricia Rose of Tightrope, which is a weekly podcast that takes time to welcome listeners and guests as thought collaborators with public intellectuals. Dr. West is also a frequent guest on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, CNN, C-SPAN, and Democracy Now! This may be the form through which you know him best. He has a passion to communicate his ideas to a vast array of audiences so that the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. is kept alive. It's a legacy of telling the truth and bearing witness to love and justice. So with that, we welcome Dr. Cornel West. Dr. West, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. You all blessed me for allowing me to be here, and I just can't wait to learn and listen. I hope I can say something to unsettle somebody, to empower somebody, enable somebody. We need to Socratize, and we want to hope that they can become better and more stronger forces for good in the language of John Coltrane.
Absolutely. I have a feeling that will happen. So I'll start with the first question, then we'll rotate through Christopher and Stephany. And let me also say that you are welcome to submit questions, I believe through the YouTube channel, and I will get them through Jared, who will be funneling them to me. And in all likelihood, we'll leave the last 30 minutes. So we're going to talk with Dr. West with the four of us for about an hour, and the last 30 minutes will be your questions that are filtered through. There are over 1,100 people that are registered for this event live, so getting your question through. Hopefully it can get through, but it may not. But anyway, please try. So first question, Dr. West. So as we all know, we have a presidential election coming up in less than 2 weeks. Our current president has been characterized by his opponents as being a sexist, a racist, a xenophobe, and a narcissist, just to name a few. However, he's also been labeled a fascist by some. A term like fascism, along with its purported enemy faction, Antifa, are thrown around a lot on social media as well in the established media. And you, Dr. West, have labeled President Trump as a kind of neo-fascist. So the term fascist for a lot of people bring to mind images of Mussolini and past fascist governments that Americans kind of instinctively abhor. Yet you claim that unfettered capitalism, when combined with military might, especially that which is lorded over by purportedly an unstable narcissist, could inaugurate a new form of fascism, or as you've called it, crypto-fascism, the likes of which we haven't seen before. So 2 questions, if you permit. One, what is the difference between kind of garden variety fascism and the kind that we are seeing today? And 2, if Trump happens to be reelected, how would his own interpretation of his reelection potentially feed his neo-fascist views?
Well, there's a whole lot in both of those questions. Thank you so very much, my dear brother. Well, one, I think the important thing is not to fetishize Brother Trump. He's a human being like anybody else. He happens to be a sign and symbol of a profound spiritual decay and moral decrepitude in the nation. So he represents the worst of the country, but he's not there all by himself. Now, what do I mean by spiritual decay? Spiritual decay is characterized by persons who lack an imagination and empathy to get inside of the skin of other people. And so they end up being profoundly driven by a greed and a lust for domination and a greed for attention, and often linked also to a greed for recognition in the form of money or whatever. By moral decrepitude, I mean the relative collapse of integrity, honesty, and decency. And so it's important to get a sense of what we mean by decay and decrepitude before we even get into fascism. Because if you get into the isms, it tends to obscure what's really at stake, you see. And when you're dealing with a spiritual decay, I mean, it's inside of all of us. We have to fight that every day. We got to fight moral decrepitude every day because we are shaped by the same culture. We just make different kinds of decisions. We want to opt for integrity, honesty, decency. We want to opt for an imagination and empathy that can take seriously the golden rule, for example. So that what happens at this particular moment is that, you know, you get the triumph of Thrasymachus over Socrates in Plato's Republic. Might makes right, Thrasymachus says. Socrates says, no, right has a gravitas that's deeper than just right. Power cannot determine morality. So that what is happening now in American life is that we live in a highly commodified culture where it's all about people up for sale, things are up for sale, people obsessed with gaining access to status and power and fame and celebrity stature. And there's a spiritual decay about that. And so then we get into the economy where you've got wealth inequality, escalating poverty, shattered families and communities, not enough jobs with a living wage, decrepit educational systems in poor and working communities, disproportionately chocolate. People are hungry for a way out. So on the vanilla side of town, people are looking for some kind of Pied Piper they could follow to come to terms with their pain, and they choose to scapegoat the most vulnerable. So they begin with the Mexicans and the Muslims and the gays and lesbians and black folk and indigenous peoples, and brown peoples, rather than confront the most powerful. So you get first an authoritarian populist movement with Trump. And it was very clear, I thought, early on, because I've seen Trump for over 30 years. I used to see him in the green room of Anita Baker concerts and the casinos in Atlantic City when he's hanging out with Mike Tyson and the others. And it was clear he was a wannabe gangster, you know. He was a cartoonist version of a gangster. And that's the way he's always been, you know. And so I call him a neo-fascist gangster wannabe, but he's calling into question the very conditions for any democracy in America. And that's what fascists do. They beat the populace down, they undermine rule of law, but they're tied to big money and big military. And in America, any fascism will have white supremacy as its public face and will have strong, toxic masculinity, patriarchal public face. And that's Trump. That's his movement. But it's not just a matter of him, as I said, it's the people who behind him. When I was in Charlottesville looking at some of the very sick neo-fascists and Ku Klux Klan brothers, it was very clear that they had a hunger and thirst for what Trump represents. But they've been emboldened. You see, they can go public now. You see, they've always been there, but now they can grow. And so we're at a moment now, we're not just a polarized society, but it's a gangsterized society. That's the beginning of an answer to your question. Because, see, the important thing is not to be surprised by evil. We should never be paralyzed by despair. You said the black man in America for over 65 years, I'm never surprised to see evil manifest in the country. You see, I got to be fortified. You see, and I got to be fortified in order to fructify. I got to generate some fruit. And what are the fruits of courage, of vision? It is truth-telling. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. It is justice-seeking. And justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. And when you're in a spiritual crisis and a moral collapse with economic inequality, with drones still being dropped, bombs still being dropped in Yemen, all around the world, the militarism of the Pentagon, you still got police out of control, engaging in forms of brutalizing and murdering too many young folk disproportionately. Chocolate. You got the women being viciously attacked because so many of the male egos are being unsettled owing to the economic and the psychic realities of our world, of our society. We've got to be able to keep track of those, but still not allow them to be the fundamental point of reference for how we see, how we feel, how we act. And in the end, I know you all know this in Colorado, in the two grand institutions, you know, in the end, anytime you talk about vicious legacies of white supremacy, male supremacy, imperialism, or whatever, the question comes down to, how are you going to learn how to see clearly what is going on? That's a Socratic vocation. That's an intellectual. You need analytical tools to keep track of the suffering. But then you got to be able to feel. You got to have a scope of feeling and empathy and a compassion for everybody. I mean, I'm a Christian, so I'm still in the business of trying to love everybody, concerned about everybody. But then in the end, you can't be a coward. You can't be a conformist. You got to act courageously. So to see clearly empire, racism, sexism, regionalism, losing sight of the physically handicapped, the physically challenged, the elderly, the poor. And so not just here, but around the world, in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, and so forth. But then you got to be able to feel and have some kind of solidarity. It can't be sentimental. I know my dear brother Hunt is writing insightfully and beautifully about James Baldwin. And he used to say what? Sentimentality, that specious emotion, the cultivation of a specious emotion with no intent of execution, no crocodile tears. Now, that is not the kind of feeling we're talking about. We're talking about compassion at the level of solidarity and then action in word, in deed, in service, in sacrifice, willingness to live, and for some of us to die for something bigger than us. That's, I think, where we are in terms of just talk about fascism. And we can talk more practically in terms of what I call an anti-fascist coalition. That's why I'm not crazy about Biden, but I'm voting for him.
Absolutely.
Because he can stop this march toward American neo-fascism, authoritarian populism, a lot of different ways of talking about it. But we're going to put a whole lot of pressure on him if he wins. I mean, if in fact we even are able to have an election, because who knows? You know, we may Trump may not leave or call out his militia. You know, we may need international observers from the United Nations or bring in UN troops so Americans won't be killing each other. We just don't know.
Can I interject?
Absolutely, my dear sister.
Because I feel everything that you're saying, but I'm also witnessing in conversation and in community that, and to the point of anti-fascist coalition, that the work sometimes becomes extremely fundamental, even on the left, that it harkens to a kind of anarchy, right? So even the fundamentalism on the right and fundamentalism on the left is still fundamentalism. And the desire to not be empathetic, like how do we speak to people, even on the left, to articulate that anarchy is still not the answer either?
Well, I mean, one is that you got to say that the love and justice, not hatred and revenge, have to be at the center. And that's an unconditional kind of thing, because if it's just going to be hatred and revenge, it's just going to add more hatred and revenge in the world. And you get Thrasymachus coming at Thrasymachus, a left Thrasymachus versus the right Thrasymachus, or a left-wing Grand Inquisitor versus and a right-wing Grand Inquisitor. Dostoevsky's great classic, Brothers Karamazov, where you just manipulating, dominating folk. So that in the end, you can't be a progressive without fundamental commitment to a love and justice. Now, you can hate the domination, you can hate the oppression, yes, absolutely. But it can't be a matter of hating persons. You see, it can't be a matter of thinking that this is all about revenge all the way down. That's the form of spiritual decay too. Now, again, I would want to use the word anarchy, my dear, so you tell me what you think, in a very, very careful way, because there is a very rich tradition of anarchism. I mean, my dear brother Noam Chomsky is an anarchist, but he's against any kind of wanton violence and so forth. There's a rich tradition of anarchists who are concerned about the concentration of power in the public sphere so that the state does not become authoritarian. That's what a lot of communists and socialists didn't come to terms with. But they're also concerned about the concentration of power in the private sphere, with monopolies and oligopolies. And that's what Marx and the others were right about. They become tyrannical at the workplace, capital versus labor, bosses versus workers. And why it is that folk at the top getting access to unbelievable amounts of money, and the working people who produce it still walk around broke as the 10 Commandments financially.
But I think also, and I don't want to dominate the conversation.
No, you're not dominating at all. You jump right in.
I think also is a nuanced perspective too on labor or workers versus bosses, right? Because the cafe shop owner down the street is not Jeff Bezos.
That's exactly right.
Cafe owner, just because they are managing in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a crisis, the same thing that they are laborers in and of themselves. And to ignore that they are laborers is just as reflective of the spiritual decay that we're all living in, right? So I think that often we see this lack of nuance for people who are just angry because they are angry and they don't want to deal with systemic issues, and they are going after people like they're on a playground, right?
No, it's true. I mean, but and as we know that, all of us tend to express our rage and anger and fury to those in close proximity.
Yes.
So, most white brothers and sisters commit murder, kill other white brothers and sisters. Most black brothers and sisters commit murder, kill other black brothers. So we live in a racially segregated world, and that's what's going to happen, you see. And the same is true in terms of when people are upset about the system.
Yes. Because
they don't see clearly enough how the system operates, who the invisible social forces are behind the levels of appearance, that they strike out against those who are closest, and it's understandable because we're all human, but it's inexcusable because we have a moral and spiritual potential to choose better, to judge better, to see better, to act better. You know what I mean? To feel deeper in that way. Exactly. Very much so. Very much so. But it's incumbent upon us, though, to, again, not allow the Trumps of the world to be the points of reference and to dictate how we react.
Yes.
See, I don't get up in the morning thinking about Trump. I've been dealing with white supremacist brothers my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
If I think about, if we black people think about the Trumps all the time, you ain't gonna get no Nina Simone's. You ain't gonna get no Aretha Franklin's because all you're doing is reacting to somebody. We have our own tradition and standards of moral and spiritual excellence and love and justice that we use as points of reference, beginning with our mamas and our daddies and our grandparents. And it cuts across race, it cuts across gender, it cuts across nation, because every community, every tradition has decent folk who are concerned about love and justice. Those are the ones you use as points of reference, you see. And in that sense, I think that we become more fortified because more than anything else, we cannot allow this grim moment to lessen our vision, to dampen our fire, and to get us to act less courageously because they want to keep us scared. They want to keep us intimidated, or they want to convince us that we have no hope, no possibility, no potential of change. That's the drumbeat over and over and over again. You see it in the debates. You see, the Trump just wants to beat down the questioner, beat down the audience, beat down America. All you have is me. I don't have to answer no questions. Impunity, no accountability, no answerability at all. Brother Pence did the same thing in his little calm way. People ask, the sister asked the question, he act like she doesn't even exist. Yep. Harris doesn't even exist. Just continually go on and on and on so that it snuffs out all Socratic dialogue, snuffs out all Socratic energies, and it snuffs out all attempts to engage in prophetic witness. That's what fascism does, to completely erase that. And, you know, it reminds me of the Roman Empire trying to snuff out a Palestinian Jew named Jesus. On that, he had gone straight to the temple and ran out our money changers. I wish churches would put that picture on the wall. Put that picture on the wall. Jesus running out the money changers in the temple. And what was the temple? It's the combination. Wall Street, Pentagon, White House, Congress, Harvard, Yale, probably University of Colorado, all the elites who are accommodating themselves, and those same elites are human beings who could choose differently. That's why he had a tax collector as part of his stable. He could choose from the well-to-do. He could choose from the zealots, the revolutionaries, and Simon. That's the kind of love and justice that we're talking about, and that's what's so magnificent, really. I want to acknowledge my dear sister Nikita, too. I know she's out there somewhere in Colorado from Dartmouth, and I salute her. And she's heard me say this before, but I just want to let her know that I'm thinking about it. I know you'll go right ahead.
All right, Dr. West, with your, you were just mentioned spirituality and a moral vision, and then you mentioned the Palestinian Jew, Jesus. So I want to stick with that point of religion.
Yes.
So last year in a conversation with Professor Robert P. George, you stated that though you draw a distinction between, that we need to draw a distinction between religion and politics, but then you go on to say that there is no religion that does not have political consequences and effects. So Christianity plays an immense role in the public square in the United States. And that fact could not be more apparent than being, you know, that most of us are located in the city of Colorado Springs, which is considered a hub or a stronghold of evangelicalism. Now, according to the Pew Research Center in 2016, 81% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. And despite the president's conduct, whether that be his racism, his continued privileging of the wealthiest segments of society, or simply his inability to tell the truth, despite all of that, they still enthusiastically support him. And so, however, you also claim the language of Christian and are a practitioner of what you've called a type of revolutionary Christianity, or elsewhere kind of prophetic Christianity. It's one rooted in the pursuit of justice and solidarity with the poor and the oppressed, and a bold critique of power. So with all that in mind, my question is, can you speak for a moment about the political consequences of evangelical Christianity in our current moment? And in addition to that, what is the role of your own prophetic Christianity in calling for radical and perhaps revolutionary change?
Appreciate that question, though. Well, I say we having a good time here already. We just starting. All three of you all. It's beautiful. Well, one is, of course, we have to be clear about what we mean by being a Christian. Because being a Christian can be a very foolish thing in the eyes of the world. That Paul says it's folly. It's an idea of thinking that something so weak and feeble, like love and compassion in a cold and cruel world shot through with domination and oppression, shot through with envy and resentment, that something so weak and feeble can still be not just a major force, but something worth living your life with and for. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the eyes of the world. That's why I started with the crucifixion, you see, because it's that attempt of the major empire of the world to crush that particular Palestinian Jew who was trying to defend the poor and running out the well-to-do of the temple. That was the reason why he was put to death as a political criminal. Now, we know he was not primarily a political figure, but his love had political consequences. And anybody who loves people believes that if they're treated unfairly, you hate the fact that that's taking place. So you're going to do something about it, you see. And so the Christian has to be marked by a unconditional love of the least of these. That's the echo of the 25th chapter of Matthew, right? Of the least of these, of the poor, the prisoner, the elderly, the orphan, the widow, the very genius of Hebrew scripture. Given all the genocide and patriarchy that's there, the genius of Hebrew scripture is the spreading of hesed, steadfast love, loving kindness to the orphan and fatherless and motherless, the embrace of the stranger, the love of thy neighbor. You get in Leviticus. That's where Jesus comes from. So in the United States, what does that mean? That means that you're going to have a deep love of indigenous peoples. You're going to look at America through the lens of the cross, of the suffering. That's where the story begins. There is no America without the land taken and the people subordinated. There's no America without the enslavement of the Africans. There's no America without the exploitation of the white male workers. There's no, and non-white male workers too, but even the white male workers with no property. The women of all colors, and then the gays and the lesbians and the trans and so forth. And it's not a matter of believing they're better human beings because they have more value. They have exactly the same value as anybody else. But you're looking at the world in a certain way. That's what I mean by learning how to see. See, to get that mist out of the way, the obscure clouds that get in the way of seeing people's humanity. So then we jump to it. 81% of our right-wing Christian, white Christian evangelicals who vote for Trump. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not homogeneous or monolithic. They got a lot of different reasons for it. But I would argue that probably the major reason would be abortion, same-sex marriage. And when I was just out at Liberty University with my dear brother, Robbie George, he's my conservative brother, Catholic brother. I love him very much. Disagree deeply, but love is deeper. And we told the brothers and sisters at Liberty University, oh, how we wish that your moral compassion for the unborn child was manifest with the same intensity in terms of abolishing poverty. You want to abolish abortion, but you don't want to abolish poverty at the same intensity? What's going on? There's an inconsistency there. You don't want to abolish the treatment of anybody, gays or lesbians or Jews or Arabs or Muslims or Mexicans or anybody who's being disabused? Or are you choosing to become so thoroughly accommodated to the Roman Empire of your day? You claim to be part of Moses' party, but you're spending a lot of time with Pharaoh. Looks like you closer to Pontius Pilate than you are to the Jesus that you claim to worship. Well, we know there's a long tradition of Christians accommodating themselves to domination. That's true for any religion. Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, like God, we won't get into caste in Indian, indigenous, and Dalit peoples and so forth. So that, and this is true in traditional African religions too. You got prophetic elements. You got elements that accommodate themselves to the hierarchy, to the powers that be. So the prophetic, and this is what James Baldwin understood, Martin King understood, Fannie Lou Hamer understood it, probably better than most. Because for them, it's a matter of life or death. See, it's not an academic abstract puzzle trying to be solved. It's a way of life. And you stepping out in this cold, cruel world and saying, there is a power to this love that can sustain me and allow me to engage in critique, resistance, resilience against any form of hatred, revenge, domination, oppression, subjugation. Now, what does that mean? That means that's what Jesus said, love your enemies. Because he said, if you take me seriously, you're going to have a whole lot of them. A whole lot of enemies. You allow your enemies to be the point of reference, you're never going to get around in the struggle for love and justice. And at a deeper level, even justice itself can become an idol. Reinhold Niebuhr used to say, any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. Justice is sustained and rescued by love. Love is deeper than justice. Don't tell me about social justice up here if you're not showing care and concern for folk. Don't talk about social justice to make you like somehow you on the cutting edge of the do-gooders party. And yet I ain't feeling no deep love and service and sacrifice in terms of what's going on in our relationship right now. Care and concern is much deeper than just abstract talk about justice. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so that's what the core of, I think, prophetic Christianity is about. But you know that we Christians, my God, we have no monopoly whatsoever on love and justice. No, not at all. Bell Hooks can teach us more. She's a Buddhist. Mm. Anton Chekhov can teach us more. He's agnostic. James Baldwin can teach us now. Now we know he's a child of the church, son of the black church, but he had to leave. He didn't see enough love there, and so he's agnostic in that way. Audre Lorde can teach us much. We can go on and on of great examples of folk. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Edward Said, secular Palestinian, but all these different voices can teach us much. We have to be open to a variety of different voices. That's the anthem of Black people. Lift every voice. Listen to the voices. Find your voice to lift it. And my voice happens to be a particular Christian voice because I'm a Jesus-loving, free Black man, and I intend to be faithful unto death. That's my tradition. And yet I can't imagine myself without Malcolm X. He's a Muslim, you see. I can't imagine myself without Rakim. He's Muslim too. Colin Kaepernick, Kendrick Lamar, they Christians. They ain't part of my own Christian tradition, but there's a whole lot of other folk from different traditions. Maulana Karanga connected to Kawaida. Haki Mahibute, his own distinctive versions of Tied to Justice. All of those are my comrades and my partners, but I don't believe in unanimity. I don't believe in any kind of a narrow consensus. I think in lifting the voices, we have to have a variety within solidarity. And that's very important. That's how we try to hold off the fundamentalism that Sister Stephany was talking about, you see. That's the beginning of an answer to your question. I mean, I do have my version of fundamentalism, which is love thy neighbor as thyself. I'm fundamentalist about that. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, but that kind of love opens one up to the vulnerability, the invincibility, the openness, the attempt to learn and listen that goes hand in hand with a love of anything, a love of wisdom, a love of truth, a love of goodness, a love of beauty, or a love of God. All of those are tied to a humility and a tenacity. There is no love without vulnerability. There is no love without humility. For we humans. For we humans, I don't know what's going on Mars. They got different dynamics. we leave that up to Sun Ra and then we'll go back and forth all the time. You know?
You speak to a very specific faith tradition that is, and even in your comment now, a commitment even unto death, right? That faithfulness to this love, to this prophetic ideal, this prophetic work of Christianity unto death. But there are those that don't, that want to see progress, that have heard the prophecy, if we can call it that, of hope and change and transformation, but are waning in the spirit because they don't walk in that same tradition unto death. How do we keep them? Because again, I am witnessing on the ground, there's a commitment. I'm going to vote for Biden because, you know, right, it is the lesser of the evils in this moment. But there are those even in chocolate communities that are fed up with the prophecy of change and transformation and justice not coming, right? So how do we speak to them to keep them engaged? Because they want to disaffect and they no longer see the hope. They have not received the love. And so they are again waning in the spirit of continuing to listen to the voices that say, keep walking in this tradition or this faith unto death.
No, I hear you. I hear you. No, I wrestle with this all the time. And when I was met with the Executive Committee of Black Lives Matter in Chicago a few years ago, I would guess, 1 out of 5 would call themselves Afro-pessimists. And Afro-pessimism of a variety of different stripes is growing. Mm-hmm. And it's understandable. And I have nothing against a well-earned pessimism relative to a certain context. What I'm against is an unearned pessimism that projects it into the eternal future. You see, Malcolm X was highly pessimistic about Black folk ever being free in America. So was Marcus Garvey. Garvey used to say, as long as Black people are in America, the masses of Black people will live lives of ruin and disaster. He hasn't been proven wrong. But he had an international stage. He said, we got to connect with Africa. We got to connect to Latin America. So he was not a pessimist in the broader sense. He was a pessimist about the United States. Du Bois was the same way. When Du Bois left, he said, the American Negro can never win. I'm going to Ghana. I'm going to the international stage. So he's not a pessimist in the broad sense. He's a pessimist about the United States. So I tell the young folk all the time, you got to keep fighting, keep seeing more, keep feeling deeper, keep acting courageously. And if, in fact, you reach Garvey's conclusion, as long as you're struggling on the international stage, that's fine. That's fine. But the pessimism, and this is what you get in some of the Afro-pessimist thinkers, who say, well, to be Black means you will forever be abject. You'll forever be a slave. There's no possibility whatsoever. You're wasting your time in terms of trying to change and transform. See, at that point, you're saying, wait, don't push folk into the crack house now. No. They still got to be warriors. They still got to be truth tellers. They still got to be justice seekers. You just need to do it in the broader arena. You see? And so if folk are saying, well, the Martin Luther King Jr. and these other folk, they run out of it. They played out. People thought Martin Luther King Jr. was played out the second day he gave a speech. Because you always got Black minds in the Black community that's brilliant, sharp, that disagree. We know what Malcolm X called it. Malcolm X went at Martin so intense. Oh my God. Now, of course, they were going to come together at the very end of Malcolm's life. But Malcolm's love of Black people led him to think, Martin, you're wasting your time. These white folk ain't going to never allow you to be integrated, to live in their neighborhood, to go to the same schools, fall in love with their daughters and sons and things. Why are you misleading Black people like that? And Martin said, well, Malcolm, you're talking about making Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama a Black state. Now that's got the chance of a snowball in hell too. So what we gonna do? And I can imagine somebody saying, can we first sing a song? Could somebody just sing a song? Dorothy Love Coates, could you come in and sing a song, please? We're going to need some arts. We need some music that'll help us sustain ourselves in the midst of what looks like no way out. It's like Henry Harlan Garnett standing up there with one leg in 1837 saying, Black people never confuse those situations with that of the Israelites of the Old Testament. For us, Pharaoh is on both sides of the bloody Red Sea. Somebody sing a song, please. we need some empowerment. It don't look like so I think what the brothers and sisters are saying on the block in the corner say, oh, Sister Stephany, brother West, Brother Hunt, Brother Scholes, I can't see a way out. I said, I understand. I don't see one clearly either, but I'm fighting to try to create one. You see what I mean? Again, a humility and a tenacity at the same time. And within Christian tradition, you got nationalists, you got integrationists, you got Marxists, you got centrists, and even you got conservatives too. A whole lot of conservative Christians in the Black community too. Mm-hmm.
Dr. West, I thought we'd take a question from an audience member. I'm getting questions, quite a few of them. So
that's wonderful.
I don't read your question, but this is one from a student of mine. So I'm hoping to bring some student questions in. Wyatt Maples, and he asks or wants to ask you, how do you keep individualism intact while simultaneously accepting how little they matter in existential terms? If we are to consider progress the goal of community and society, then must we understand individuals to move to the back burner?
Oh, but no, first we want to draw a distinction between individualism and individuality. For me, each individual, no matter what color, national identity, or sexual orientation, has a dignity and a sanctity. And individuals make a big difference. All you got to do is ask your mama. You make a big difference. Ask your child. Ask your close partner. Ask your good friend. Ask your companion. You see? So you can't eliminate individuals, but you have to have a commitment to an individuality that's rooted in family, community, history, heritage, tradition. Individualism is the myth that somehow we either are self-made somehow, which means we gave birth to ourselves. That's very difficult to pull off, of course. That we're self-made, that somehow we're so outside of tradition, outside of family, outside of heritage, that it's all about these isolated individualistic egos bouncing up against each other. That's the atomistic individualism that is so dominant in the United States. That's one reason why we can't deal with this pandemic. See, we can't be convinced, a large number of our fellow citizens, that they're not just individuals concerned about themselves in isolated forms, but they're part of something bigger, a community, public life. Be concerned in that way. So individuality is part of the language of Hebrew scripture. There's no individualism in Hebrew scripture. This individuality is personality, made in the image and likeness of God. Individualism is a highly atomistic, isolated, deracinated, rootless sense of being an individual on one's own, dependent solely on one's own self, which means one has to also teach oneself a language. It ain't gonna happen. If you give birth to yourself and teach yourself a language, you can rest assured that you dream. It ain't real. It ain't real. But on the other hand, it's also true that we have to be in solidarity. Individuality and solidarity go hand in hand. And that's because other people's individuality is precious.
Thank you.
And priceless. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Christopher, you want to ask a question?
Absolutely. So recently, and this will be kind of switching gears a bit. So recently, the icon James Lawson, in an interview with the United Methodist News, referred to the Black Lives Matter movement as both the most important nonviolent campaign since the movement in the 1960s. And then he goes on to refer to it as a modern religious movement. So comparisons between Black Lives Matter movement and the Civil Rights Movement are pretty commonplace. But Lawson's framing of Black Lives Matter as a religious movement pushes against the commonly held belief that Black Lives Matter is somehow a secular movement. So as someone who's supported and participated in Black Lives Matter actions, and I can vividly remember seeing the images of you being arrested in Ferguson, is our contemporary movement for Black lives a religious movement in your estimate, and in what ways?
Ooh, again, appreciate the question. I'm so glad you raised the issue. Jim Lawson, 91 years old, he'll be 92 next month. I just talked to him on the phone. He gave that powerful eulogy for the great John Lewis just a few months ago. I mean, he was the great prophetic voice, really. He's got Caribbean roots. His father's from Canada, his mama's from the Caribbean, and close to Martin. He has been consistent. It's hard to be consistent when you really in solidarity with poor people. Most people get about 45, 50, start slowing down, become well-adjusted to injustice. Well-adapted to indifference. Not Jim Lawson. Not at all. I have great respect for him. I think he's certainly right in the first part in terms of it being the most significant protest movement, campaign, demonstration, 2,000 cities, unprecedented in U.S. history. And then it's global too. And it's led by queer sisters and brothers, but founded by three, you see. So already then you got a shift in terms of the ways in which people perceive respectability. And because so many of our churches have failed when it comes to patriarchy, homophobia, and transphobia, that many churches have a distance from it. So I would want to disagree with my brother Lawson a little bit. I would say that it is a spirit-filled movement. I wouldn't call it a religious movement. Because in the meetings that we have, sometimes we just break off and start dancing. Because the tears become overwhelming. Reflecting on analysis and stories of what's been happening in the Black community, what's been happening to the young Black people, what's been happening in the mass incarceration regime, what happens in the schools. You have to have a spirit feel, and spirit feel is not the same as religious. For me, it's not the same as spiritual. No, spiritual, that's the new world hippie thing. Y'all going to do your thing in the spiritual new age, go off in the woods and, fly high in the friendly sky for a while. I know y'all legalized that in Colorado now, but we won't get into that right now. We won't get into that right now. But all of that, I'm spiritual. I'm a spiritual person. All right, okay, we're going to see what kind of courage you got when it's time to bear witness. Okay. But spirit feel is sharper, you see. And that's what I see in the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, every movement does always have the challenge of a spirit as well as the moral or the ethical. And that's where, somebody like myself, because I'm still part of the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou. See, that's where I come in strong in terms of making sure that the hatred and revenge is pushed down. See, making sure that any form of xenophobia pushed down. But it would be interesting to see what he'd have to say, because he would either agree with me or disagree. Because, he's a very, what would be the right word? I've preached in his church, and I'm not a preacher, but he allows a lay brother like me to say something sometimes. He's idiosyncratic in his theology. He doesn't follow any dogmas or doctrine as a Methodist. So maybe when he says religious, it's like Charles Long, the great Charles Long. We just lost him, right? It's this broader sense of structures of feeling and values that are tied to higher powers. Well, that's more generic. You say, okay, you find that Black Lives Matter strong, but not in a narrow religious sense of dogma and doctrine. It's not Christian, it's not Islamic, it's not Buddhist in that way. Does that make sense, something?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's good. That's good.
And I think Jeff has Hey, Jeff, you're...
Jeff is also on mute.
God. Apologies. I'm glad you could at least see my mouth moving so you could stop me. We'll take another audience member question. And Dr. West, I think this is from your friend, Nikita McPherson. Is that the person that you know?
Listen, Nikita.
Okay,
so she
good.
is there.
She is.
Give it a hug.
She's asked several fantastic questions, but here's one that I think is very interesting, and it kind of follows a question I know that Stephany kind of wanted to ask as well. Here's her question. Will it ever be possible to convince Black people that having a seat at the table, being proximate to whiteness, and or sacrificing our integrity for, quote, donations to the Black community will not save us? I trust within the question, is there any hope that the actions to cozy up to a white community are somewhat futile? And what would convince Black people to have that realization, if in fact that is a legitimate realization to have?
Well, I think Nikita herself is the answer to the question. That she herself is in a high place. She's got integrity. She's got vision. She's not going to ever sell her soul for a mess of pottage. She's not going to forever accommodate herself to any form of injustice, but she knows she's got to be able to be jazz-like. She got to be flexible, fluid, protean, able to move in and out of different contexts and still preserve who you are and be in process, dynamically maturing and developing as you move from one context to the next. Now, is there any cure for massive spiritual corruption among Black people? Well, Black people are human like everybody else. They're going to have to work out the ways in which they hold off. Lack of integrity, lack of honesty, lack of courage. That's a human challenge, you see. And every civilization, every gender, every slice of humanity has that battle going on in the battlefield of their own souls. The choices that they make, the decisions they make, the judgments they make, the deeds they decide to perform. That's the spirit-filled moral challenge of everybody. And we've seen it, in Black communities, like we've seen it in brown communities, we've seen it in white communities, we've seen it in Jewish communities, we've seen it in Arab communities, Palestinian communities. It's a human thing. But the beautiful thing is that in all of those communities, we've got slices of human beings who choose to go against the cowardly grain, to go against the grain of hatred and injustice, to go against the grain of domination, as does Nikita. Way out in Colorado, because, she's the East Coast sister now. She's just way out there with y'all. You all blessed to have her, just like these places are blessed to have all three of you.
Stephany, you want to go?
Sure. I'm so grateful that you articulated that Black Lives Matter being started by queer Black women, right?
Yes.
And to specify that they're, that they are at the center and at the heart of this work. And for so long, looking at the way in which domination has operated on the planet, Sister Bell Hooks will say, when we began domesticating the planet, that's when we, screwed up, right? We took dominion to mean domination.
That's right.
As we are still trying to process prophetically what the hope is for us in this world, and to move beyond to dismantle and build something new, can you talk to the ways in which queering our politics and embracing a feminine energy might help shift the ways in which we have been limited in even in our strategies prior to now?
That's a profound question. No, we'd have to have a seminar on that one, my dear. That's true. Because, you see, part of the challenge here is that when you look at this ecological catastrophe that's intensifying, and the possible nuclear catastrophe. We got two gangsters with their fingers on the button, Putin in the Russian Empire and Trump in the American Empire. They can push the button and the whole thing's over. Right in the middle of our dialogue. Poof, yep. Just the cockroaches left. Just the cockroaches left. And a few folk in New Zealand, you know.
And Keith Richards.
Keith Richards. So that when we say queering or we say feminizing, we have to always recognize that any talk about any identity has to be inseparable from moral integrity, scope of solidarity, and substantive morality. You see? And so that when we talk about blackenizing, well, it depends on who, you know, you got Clarence Thomas over here, you got black gangsters over here, you got black thugs over there. They just as black as me and you. You see what I mean? So that identity's got to be grounded in an integrity. That's where we start separating ourselves from the gangsters and the thugs. You see what I mean? Same would be true with queers. We say queering, well, queers got gangsters and thugs too. And you got magnificent queers, like the three who founded the Black Lives Matter movement. Women the same way. You know, you got women doing all kind of dominating things. You know, I mean, not just white women, you know, being narrow, like, for example, Sister Amy right now, who wants to be on the Supreme Court, right? I mean, her problem is she can't see broad enough. Too tight. She doesn't feel deep enough. You see? So she's obsessed with this abortion thing and can't say a mumbling word about the poverty inside with the corporate elite over and over and over and over again in her cases, just like Clarence Thomas. She and Clarence going to be kissing cousins. Cross race, cross gender, but still tied to the wealthy. See what I mean? So that even when we talk about queering X or feminizing Y, we have to be very explicit about the integrity and solidarity we're actually talking about. Because all identities can be weaponized and deployed in very dominating ways. And that's why we need to be accountable to each other. And this is where democracy plays a very important role. And this is the reason why, in the end, you know, it's, I think the jazz world at its best is probably one of the last sources for intellectual vision that we have. See, when Mary Lou Williams sit down on the piano, or when Sarah Vaughan is singing and Billie Holiday singing, you see, they're singing as women in women's bodies. They happen to be geniuses. Most people not geniuses, but they happen to be geniuses. But they're involved in forms of excellence and integrity and solidarity with other musical voices all around the world and across gender and so forth. Right? And so they become examples of what it means to be great human beings who are great women. Billie, queer, Sarah, divine and human at the same time, given her genius. That's the connection with the human and integrity and solidarity that has to be at the center of identity, or you end up fetishizing identity. You see what I mean? You end up fetishizing identity. And we start with ourselves. We start with ourselves. I mean, because I know I was a dead-up gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivity. So when I talk about being a gangster, or call Trump a gangster, which he is, I'm talking about something inside of me that I got to deal with every day. You see, that's a moral and a spiritual issue, or a spiritual issue. You see what I mean? That's a choice that I got to wrestle with all the time. That's why I have to be accountable. That's why he has to be accountable. And that's why the golden rule makes sense, you see. That no matter what, like a lot of people were talking about, well, you know, Trump got the virus. I hope he drops dead. No. The golden rule is still operating. If you had the virus, you wouldn't want people to say you ought to drop dead. His humanity is not reducible to his gangster activity. His gangster activity is characteristic of the choices he makes. But he's still made in the image of God, and he got family, he got loved ones. So you don't pray that he drops dead. because all you're doing is just reinforcing more of the hatred and revenge. They say, well, oh, no, that's abstract. We in a battle now. No, because anytime you're in a battle, the process of how you fight is inseparable from how you end up. And so these different dimensions of identity, integrity, solidarity, and so forth become very important in terms of how we fight. And yet, you know, at the moment we're not winning. There's no doubt about that. We have to be very honest. The neo-fascisms are all around the world. They're in Brazil, they're in Hungary, they're in Turkey, they're in India, they're in Russia, they're in China, they're in the United States, and so forth and so on. They're growing all around the world. That's the kind of moment that we live in. Is that beginning to get at your seminar-like course?
I think we need to put the seminar together.
Yeah.
Seminar.
A Zoom seminar.
Yes.
Dr. West, this is a question from me. This may not be well known to some people in our audience, but you've had a long-standing kind of ideological opposition to Barack Obama. And a part of your criticism of Obama has been linked to your criticism of a certain sector of the upwardly mobile Black middle class, in particular in the 21st century, but also in the 20th too. You assert that many upper middle class African Americans are only, quote, representational, or that they're representing an image of the Black man or woman who has made it via certain capitalistic avenues that have traditionally only really been traveled by white men and some women, in order to show that, quote, Black people can make it. But according to you, Black men and women should be, quote, transformational instead of just representational. And I think it's interesting because you highlight comics and musicians oftentimes when you're looking for examples of these transformational figures such as Richard Pryor, James Brown, Prince. You talked about John Coltrane earlier, instead of oftentimes like philosophers or political figures. And these musicians and comics are kind of uniquely able to tear down or at best slow down the desire to represent African-American performers as mere representation. So why is that? And what do you find in musicians and comics that and the platform which they're using to express themselves that enables more of a transformational presentation as opposed to representational? And if you want us to talk first about more specifically what some of your issues are with Obama and those like him, or Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Brother. There's a wonderful book I was just reading called Hope and Scorn, Eggheads, Experts, and Elites in America, written by Brother Brown, Michael Brown. And he's got actually a very fascinating treatment of my whole trajectory in the last 30 years or so. But he begins the conclusion by saying, when I introduced Brother Barack Obama in Harlem in 2007, I told him and the audience, I said, we're going to push this brother across the line. I'm going to do over 100 events. I did about 75 or 80 for him. I said, and when he wins, I'm going to break dance for a whole afternoon. And the next day I will be his major critic, because his calling is one of governance. My calling is Socratic and prophetic. So we're in different lanes. You see, my calling is truth-telling and justice-seeking. His calling is politician to govern. And I supported him twice. Just like I'm voting for Biden. I support Trump. I'm trying to push Biden across the line. Any politician, I don't care what color, you see, must be held accountable. That's what Socratic, prophetic calling and vocation is all about. Accountability, you see. And any politician who gets in there doesn't want too many strong critics. And so as soon as he bailed out Wall Street and not homeowners, I said, no, he's siding with the wealthy. He's siding with the money changers. When he let the torturers off under the Bush administration and kept Brennan for counterterrorism and dropped over 20,000 bombs and 563 drones on innocent folk in Yemen and Pakistan and Afghanistan, those children have the same status as American children for me as a Christian. Mm-hmm. Every flag is under the cross for me as a Christian. You see, so I had to bring critique to bear for him when he didn't hit the new Jim Crow directly, when he wouldn't mention the word poverty. And Martin Luther King Jr. ended his pilgrimage in this space, on this earth, talking about poverty and critiques of militarism. Well, that's my tradition, Martin Luther King Jr. You see, So he's not taking seriously that tradition. So I went at him tooth and nail. And then, I got a lot of trouble with black brothers and sisters. I said, that's fine. That's fine, because you don't love black folk for black folk to love you back. You love black people because they're worthy of being loved. You're not in this for popularity. It's about integrity. It's about being true. Now, one of the reasons why the musicians mean much to me is because you can't be a great artist or a great musician without being true to yourself. You can't inspire people. We just lost Pam Hutchison of the Emotions. Show Me How, and So I Can Love, and Walking the Line, and so forth, out of Chicago, right out of Chicago. One of the great, right? They can't be true to themselves and engage in fakery, engage in wearing a mask. James Brown didn't wear a mask. Coltrane didn't wear one. Gladys Knight don't wear one. Smokey Robinson don't wear one. Delphonics, Dramatics. We go on and on and on. What is it about the artists, especially the musicians, who are willing to empty themselves, kenosis, to donate themselves, take the mask off, and proceed? James Baldwin. Love forces us to take off the mask we know we cannot live within, but fear we cannot live without. Now, James Baldwin's love warrior, he's like a musician with a pen. That's a rare thing. Now, what is it about our philosophers and our writers? Well, one is that the writing industry and the academy is structured in such a way that the white normative gaze is so heavy that Black folk who enter that space have to forever look over their shoulder, because that's, in this context, that has tremendous gravitas. Whereas the musicians, John Coltrane plays giant steps, and the critic says he don't know what he's doing. He's playing too fast. He needs to go back and learn his lessons. He don't give a damn about that white critic. He calls up Sonny Rollins and say, "What you think, Sonny?" Because he knows that's his standard. You see what I mean? He calls up other musicians who he understands to be at the highest level, you see. And that's what it means to fall back on standards of excellence that you can trust in order for you to be the force for good that you are. See, Alice, you playing the piano. What you think about what I'm playing? Now, McCoy Tyner's a teenager. What you think? It's transgenerational. What you think, McCoy? Eric Dolphin, you 22 years old. What you think? Because it's not a matter of age or even just gender or even just region, but they meet certain standards. And that's what intellectuals need. Intellectuals need to be as free as the jazz musicians. And if that were the case, the academy would look very different. It look very, very different. It wouldn't be so tied into the narrow paradigms and frameworks, tied into certain kind of dogma, claiming that somehow they're anti-dogmatic, but those dogmas still operating, and they're not seeing enough. They're not broad enough in their view. You see what I mean? And I'm not saying musicians have a monopoly on this, but you can't be a great artist. You can't be a Rembrandt without putting what's inside of you on the canvas at the highest level of what it means to be a painter. That's the return of the prodigal son that you get in that powerful painting, you see. It's letting it all out, giving all of the mastery that he has of the technique, but also giving the unmastery, the attempt to jump out into an uncharted territory. You can't master a territory that is uncharted. But that's what it is to be a serious thinker, a serious philosopher, a serious artist, and in a way, a serious human being, because we're all trying to live. This is the art of living,
Does that space exist for, because Jeff started the question off with the critique of Barack Obama, and we have individuals like Cori Bush, AOC, Jamal Brown going into politics. Does that space exist for the serious, committed human being to govern?
Ooh, it's tough. It's hard. I mean, you got brother Bowman, who I, supported, and he's my dear brother. Jamal, he's going to be there with AOC. He's going to be there with Sister Omar. He's going to be there with Sister Rashida. There are some spaces there. Ro Khanna, of course, Brother Bernie Sanders. He's my dear brother. But the constraints are so tight on all of them in electoral politics. Very tight. Very tight. Because the big money is just disproportionately shaping it all. They're tied to Wall Street. They're tied to the Pentagon. Most of the Democrats still vote for Trump's military budget. Now, the press doesn't talk about it, but they do. Yeah. $740 billion, and they still vote. Why? They don't want to be soft on the military. Just like when they were expanding the new Jim Crow in the jails, they didn't want to be soft on crime. To be a politician was just to check and see which way the wind is blowing. There were thermometers rather than thermostats. So whatever's out there, I got to reflect what people are thinking. No, you out there to reshape how people think. That's what a thermostat does. How many politicians are thermostats? Very, very few. Very few.
Thank you. Here's another question from an audience member. This is actually from a friend of mine, Kiva Case. He asked a couple really great questions. Number one, is there such a thing as a post-racial America? If so, what does it look like and how do we get there? And finally, do we even want a post-racial America?
We want an America in which human beings are viewed in terms of their sanctity, dignity, and potentiality, and human beings come in colors just like they come in genders. You see, so I don't want anybody to eliminate my blackness. I'm a black man, born black and black, gonna die black. Brother Jeff, you are a white brother. Now, we know whiteness is a construct. Blackness is a construct. We know that. It's arbitrary in that sense. No doubt. But so many constructs are arbitrary, and we still have to be able to come to terms with them and pierce to them. So when I see Brother Jeff, I see a human being who happens to be with a brother with glasses and nice beard, and white brother who's been shaped by white supremacy the way in which I've been shaped by white supremacy. He's a human being. I want to see a humanistic America at its deepest level. That's what Malcolm X said. I'm for the truth no matter who's for it. I'm for justice no matter who's for it. I'm a human being first, and then a black man, and then a Muslim. So it's the humanistic. That's not post-racial at all. It's working through the constructs to get in contact with our humanity. I think so. In that sense, it's misleading. A lot of people who want to opt for post-racial America, they really want to avoid just how difficult the struggle is to work through white supremacy.
Thank you. Christopher, Stephany, I have questions from audience members that I can ask, unless y'all...
Yes, absolutely.
Audience members?
There are a lot of people online asking questions right now.
There are a lot of people. We could ask questions to you for about 4 days from what we have. This one comes from Professor at UCCS, Roger Martinez Davila. He's in the history department here. He asks, for faculty members of color, how do you recommend we help transform our university cultures into ones that value disparate voices? And what daily actions can we take?
I would say you can't have a university that's not involved in the quest for truth and knowledge. And if the university is involved in the quest for truth and knowledge, then you already should have a profound commitment to a variety of voices to help us all be able to see more deeply and broadly. Because too many times, again, the frameworks and the paradigms that we use are just so truncated, and oftentimes they're just downright mendacious. They just tell lies, and they help rationalize lies. Now, there's all of us have our forms of learned ignorance. But I think it's sad, really, in some ways, that it takes protests in 2,000 cities in the American empire for some universities to reach the conclusion that maybe we ought to pay a little bit more attention to the role of white supremacy in the shaping of modernity and American life. Is that what it takes for you to be concerned about truth? Because all it is a matter of just telling the truth. Now, if a university says we're not interested in truth and knowledge, then they need to say that and say going into you're in a different. You got different M's and A's, or you're basically a business. Oh, you're a gangster enterprise. You're doing something, but you're lying about it. You see, that's the kind of serious challenge we have to be in. It's not just professors of color.
Mm-hmm.
Every university professor ought to be concerned about the quest for truth and knowledge. You don't just leave all of the concern about white supremacy to people of color. That's their stuff. No, they pursuing the truth. And you can't tell the truth about America without telling the truth about the whole country. From George Washington to our precious indigenous brothers and sisters, how Colorado, or part of Colorado, became the United States.
Mm-hmm.
What was it when it was under Mexico? What was at stake in the Mexican War with Texas and California and Arizona and so forth? What was the nature of that war? Imperial expansion and so forth. Oh, that's anti-American. No. We are pro-truth, pro-justice in America, in the making of America. There's nothing anti-American about that. Now, if truth and justice and knowledge strikes one as being anti-American, then maybe your conception of America is too narrow. That's part of the conversation. But I don't believe any of us have a monopoly on truth. So we have to learn from each other. We've got to learn from each other. I mean, you can imagine conservative brothers and sisters talking about the genius of William Faulkner. Well, they're right. Faulkner was a genius. We could learn something from that brother. Toni Morrison learned a whole lot. We read her MA thesis at Cornell University. We learn a whole lot from Faulkner. But what did he say? He said, oh, when it comes to shooting, I'm going to be shooting these ends like I don't know what. James Baldwin had to respond, though, didn't he, brother? Huh? Baldwin came out swinging. But Faulkner's genius is not reducible to either his skin color or being from Mississippi. He was wrestling with what it meant to be human as a white supremacist person. And he had critiques of white supremacy, but also affirmations of it. And the same would be true for any of the great writers, from the Alice Walkers and the Muriel Rukeyser's and the Emily Dickinsons and others. You see that they're all human beings shaped by their history and their circumstances. And we learn from their genius, their talent, and we're critical when we see their blind spots.
Thank you, Dr. West. So this is from another audience member, Roger Butts, another friend of mine. Regarding the old civil rights religious coalition, what can be done to reconnect it and reignite it, even with, and perhaps especially with, the decline in institutional religion in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different moment, very, very different moment. We began talking about the spiritual decay and moral decrepitude in the American empire. That affects every institution. It's not just Congress and White House. It affects every mosque, every synagogue, every church. And the commodification of the culture goes hand in hand with the commodification of religion. And you can't have a struggle for justice with a highly commodified religion. You just can't. It's just buying and selling of faith, buying and selling. The prayers become, let's make a deal with God. The choirs get reduced to those prayer teams that stimulate and titillate rather than care and nurture and touch people's souls. The pastors become CEOs rather than pastors. The market model permeates the whole religious institution. And so many of the young folk are unchurched, unmosqued, unsynagogued because they engage in a critique and indictment of commodified religion. And I can understand that. So that I don't think we'll ever be able to recast the old alliance that we had between King and Rabbi Heschel and so many, great Miles Horton, the great white brother, the founder of Highlander Center in Tennessee. We can learn from them in terms of their vision and their courage, but we've got to use that vision and courage that they had for our new circumstances. And so I don't think that we can recast the old religious alliances. And we should note too, of course, after 1965, with the pushing back of white supremacist immigration laws, that America now is a very, very different place. And I think a very important, fascinating place because of our brothers and sisters who've come from all around the world since 1965. That was not in place in the 1950s and 60s. It was very much black-white in the 50s and 60s. But now from Africa and from Asia and the Middle East and Latin America is even more so than it was in the 50s, where you already had so many crucial, Mexicans and Chicanos and Spanish-speaking folk in place in the 50s. Today, that the immigration patterns have reshaped so much of how you talk about alliances. Our Muslim brothers and sisters growing now as opposed to what was the case in the 1950s, you see. All of those realities, let alone the issues of gender and sexuality that we talked about before. I mean, now Bayard Rustin, he could come out of the closet and do his thing.
Yes.
Shoot, that brother, he played some serious guitar. He was a great folk singer. He pulled his guitar out and started singing. And Patel Luther Vandross come on back from the dead and sang with him, giving his own bisexuality and so forth. Hey, you don't need to be in the closet no more. Come on out. Be yourself. Express yourself.
Dr. West, another question from an audience member, Brittany King. This is in regards to your opinion on reparations. So she asks, in regards to reparations, do you think it would advance the Black community? She's not specific on what form that would take. And if so, should Black intellectuals like Thomas Sowell be involved with how reparations are implemented with the company of someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Angela Davis and you?
Well, I mean, one, I think, again, it's a question of truth and justice. Let's find out what the truth was of the past, what kind of damage was done. Just like tort law, you have response to the damage. Certain kinds of responses, payment or whatever it is. The best book we have is William Dargety and Sister Mullen's book of From Here to, what's the name of that book? From Here to Equality. I'm just looking at it right here. From Here to Equality, a history of Black reparations movement. I don't see how anybody could avoid the challenge of reparations if you're concerned about truth and justice. The question becomes, what kind of procedure do we have in order to not just talk about it, but really move towards some serious legislation? I mean, the Federal Reserve gave Wall Street over $20 trillion. Reparations is asking for 14 in this text. Could have done that a long time ago. It's a public institution. It didn't have to go to Wall Street. It could have gone to community banks. It could have gone to a whole lot of different things. You see, it was our money. It was our government. You see, that's Obama too. That's 3.5 years under Obama, tied to Larry Summers and all the other pro-Wall Street economists and what have you, see. So that the issue of reparations really is truth and justice. In that way, I thank God for my dear sister Yvette Cornell and Brother Antonio Moore of ADOS pushing this issue. I thank God for Brother Coates' essay, played a very important role. I've had my disagreements with my dear brother, but his voice on this issue has been very, very important, you see. And I think all of us have to understand the ways in which we're talking not just about slavery. We're talking about Jim Crow. We're talking about redlining of banks. We're talking about the Social Security Act that excluded agricultural laborers and domestic maids. Most of Black folk fell under those categories. That was intentional because of the Southern Democrats. They said these Black folk not going to get part of this. The GI Bill, why Black folk only got 4% of that. All of those reparations has 3 pillars: slavery, Jim Crow, Jane Crow, American terrorism, and ongoing discrimination, which is still at work, you see. And so people get a chance to read William Dargety and Mullen's book on this. You can see truth, justice. That's how you proceed. Again, for me as a Christian, I look at the world through the lens of the cross. I'm looking for unarmed truth, condition of truth, allow suffering to speak, unapologetic love, tied to justice, inseparable from justice. That's what it means to try to see clearly through all of the mist, through all the lies, and keep track of the crimes. because lies and crimes have an intimate relation with one another. Mendacity and criminality go hand in hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at our clock. We probably have time for one more question.
Don't worry about the clock unless people get tired, though, brother. We just we light the flow. We just let the spirit flow now, man.
Be careful what you ask for. We could be here until midnight.
Well, if we are going to let the spirit flow, and again, I keep jumping in when I'm supposed to.
No, you jump in anytime you like. You jump in anytime you like.
I'm curious because, you know, as a young girl, an undergrad at Clark Atlanta University, I was reading you. And so a lot of this, you know, a lot of the questions that you get asked are similar questions that you consistently talk about, issues that you consistently talk about. If we go move in a space of spirit, I am wondering, what are the questions that people don't ask you and you are always like, I wish they would let me talk about?
Oh, Lord, see, that's a magnificent question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question in these 67 years, which means I don't really have an answer to it. I mean, I really don't, because you all have asked such magnificent questions that I can't think of any questions that I wouldn't, I would have liked to ask at all. I mean, I could tell you this, that for me, the most fundamental question is how could it be that against such odds, I could show up and have the most magnificent mama and daddy and brother and sisters? Mm-hmm. I don't deserve that at all. You know what I mean?
I love it.
And it's like that line in Sly Stone, Sing a Simple Song. I'm living, loving, overloving. I've been overloved. And there's an overjoy with that overlove. And I can't take no responsibility. I just showed up in the womb. Boom, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Irene West dropped me. Same hospital as the Wilson brothers of the Gap Band. They're grabbing Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. That's Black Wall Street. That's where we were born. And then all this time, in the midst of such a cold and cruel world, all this love is coming my way. That's the most important thing that allows me to keep moving on a certain level, you see. But Shiloh Baptist Church, Jesus, Black Panther Party, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, all of those become constitutive of who I am. Then I go to Harvard. Lo and behold, there's John Rawls, there's Hillary Putnam, there's Stanley Cavell, there's Martha Nussbaum. These folk are treating me so beautifully. I go to Princeton, there's Richard Rorty, there's Sheldon Walden, there's Walter Kaufman, there's Tom Nagel, Tom Scanlon. They treat me so wonderfully. I don't deserve that kind of treatment. They don't even know about my gangster proclivities. You know what I mean? I said, ooh, but then what? My experience is so different than most of my brothers and sisters on the globe. And yet, in many ways, they have been deeply loved too. So they got some elective affinities of the love I receive, but given my blessed life, the least I can do is be truthful and be justice-seeking in the little time I have from mama's womb to tomb and find joy in it. We started off with that. The fruits of the calling of love of wisdom, love of good, love of beauty is joy in struggle, in service to others. And it's that's why I'm just so blessed. You know, I just co-wrote a song with Bootsy Collins, a great funk master, called Stars. See, stars have no names, they just shine. Stars have no names, they just shine. You know what I mean? Sly Stone say everybody is a star. So everybody got a light that can shine. And then here comes Fannie Lou Hamer. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And you see, that's the tradition that I was blessed with. Sarah Ray, my Sunday school teacher, used to tell me, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, You ought to leave a little heaven behind. What kind of Socratic heaven are you leaving behind as a teacher? What kind of prophetic heaven are you leaving behind as a politician, as a leader, as a head of an organization? What kind of heaven are you leaving behind with your kids, your friends, your partners, strangers, even your enemies? Mm. That's the kind of life that's worth living. You know what I mean? No matter what, they can put you in solitary confinement like my dear brother right now, H. Rap Brown, brother Imam Al-Hameen. He's strong as ever. Mumi Abu Jamal right now, strong as ever because their souls are intact. How many folk walk around the street? Spiritual bondage, intellectual bondage. How many professors who claim to be so learned, still captive to the status of the discipline, the hierarchy of the profession? How does that get in the way of your ability to see and feel and act courageously before the worms get your body? That's what it is to be a serious human being who doesn't take one's own self too serious, because you have to be able to laugh at yourself too. We're back to what Brother Jeff was talking about in terms of Richard Pryor, Lenny Bruce, Moms Mabley, Monique, Eddie Murphy on a good day.
Well, thank you so much. My spirit is telling me that this is a really wonderful place to stop. I'm also thinking of UCCS employees that are working behind the scenes on this.
Absolutely. And thank them so very much.
You know, we could talk forever. Christopher wants to say something about this event and it kicking off, hopefully, kind of a series of events that we're going to do in Colorado Springs. Christopher, you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in bringing the event to a close, and again, thank you, Dr. West, and thank you, Dr. Stephany Rose, and thank you, Jeff Scholes, for this event, for putting this together. This was an event. And I wanted to take a moment to just highlight something local. I wanted to highlight the work of the Campus Votes / CC Votes initiative. So for those of you who have questions about the election, please visit the CC Votes page, which can be accessed through the Colorado College website, and for information about the election and how to register to vote. And there's a video on the CC Votes website that has a full nonpartisan explanation of every item on the Colorado ballot. So this is a great resource if you have questions. And don't forget that the last day to register to vote online and mail in your ballot is October 26th. And after this date, you have to take your ballot or drop it, take it to a drop box or vote in person. But not only that, just another note is that CC Votes will be offering a ballot drop off at the Warner Student Center at Colorado College. And on election day, we'll be taking people to the polls from the Warner Student Center. So if you have any questions about that, please contact the CC Votes at coloradocollege.edu.
Thank you, Christopher. And thank you, Stephany, as well, for contributing so wonderfully to this event. Thank you to the tons of audience members that joined us and especially submitted questions. And finally, thank you, Brother West, if you'll permit me to call you that.
Absolutely. We might be my brother. You're definitely my brother, man.
Thank you so much. This will be recorded. So I'm very glad that I'll be on YouTube with you a little bit, which would be nice. In perpetuity, I might say. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us and providing these wonderful insights for an hour and a half of your time. And we hope to speak to you soon, hopefully maybe even on one of our campuses somewhere down the road.
Indeed. Now that post-pandemic,
gotta be. I know. Hopefully sooner than later, but it won't be for a while at least. But
that'll give us a chance to deal with some of these other viruses that's been running amok out here, you know? White supremacy, male supremacy, and wealth inequality and imperial policies. We keep track of all these viruses.
Absolutely.
We can coordinate our seminar.
Yes, exactly.
Anyway, you all so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really, thank you so much. And thank you everyone who's watching and listening. And yes, we'll catch you on the flip side. Thank you.
Stay strong. Stay safe.